How many of you are concerned about the state of the economy? How many of you are concerned about the state of English football? Well, what I will hope to do by the end of my session is to make sure that you don't need to worry about any of those things, because I will give you something else to worry about that might be far more important and might actually save your life. But please listen to my story, and I hope that towards the end of it I'll try and answer some of the specific questions, because you'll probably find that as I talk it doesn't appear to answer those questions, but I hope that it does. I am electromagnetically sensitive, hypersensitive, a condition which doesn't exist, and a number of years ago was reported in the press about my particular condition, and was probably the first person in the UK to actually go high profile in terms of what was happening with mobile communications. How many of you use a mobile phone? How many of you have Wi-Fi? How many of you have Wi-Fi at home? How many of you have small children at home? Okay. When I ran, before Samworth Woods, I ran Port Farms and I became an exec of Northern Foods. And most of my time was spent driving around the countryside on my mobile phone, because you feel guilty when you're out on the road driving that you're not in communication, and you feel that you've always got to be speaking to people at the sites to make sure that you're in touch. And I used a mobile phone for about 15 years. And of that 15 years, 14 years, no problems at all. No issues, no problems. In fact, I would have been one of those people that as I drove around and my reception was poor, I would have said, we need another mast there, we need another mast there, to make sure that the reception was good enough. In my 15th year of using a mobile phone, something rather strange started to happen to me. After I'd been on the mobile phone for a long period of time, I started to notice some weird sensations in my ear and in my head. And I suppose, like most people, I was reassured by the government and the mobile phone industry that anything that happened was purely localised, not long-term, it was perfectly safe, nothing to worry about. There was not enough energy in the microwaves that you put to your head to cause a thermal effect. And I was reassured by that. I carried on using my mobile phone. And after a period of time, found that I couldn't. The pain that I was getting was so intense. And when I say when I was using my mobile phone, I mean quite literally while I used my mobile phone. Pain, no pain. Pain, no pain. And when you become hypersensitive to something, believe me, it's not confusing. Whether that be peanuts, whether that be wheat, whether that be dust in the atmosphere, if you become hypersensitive, it's not confusing. And after a period of time of using my mobile phone less and less, sadly I didn't stop using my mobile phone because I was addicted to it, probably like yourselves. What I found was that the pain was starting to come after literally a few minutes, 30 seconds, instantaneously. And in September of 2000, which was the last time I used my mobile phone, the pain was so intense after 1 second that it felt almost as if my eardrum had burst. It was that intense. And I swore that day that I would never use a mobile phone again, and I haven't. But sadly, whatever damage can be done to you had been done. And what I found in the following days and months is that these weird sensations that I had had previously whilst using my mobile phone, I was getting around television, computer, dishwasher, in my car, you name it. Wherever there was microchips, and my first thoughts were that I'd become sensitive to microchips, I was starting to react. My first reaction was, because mainly it was in my head, was I must have a brain tumour. So I went to my doctor to find out that, no, you didn't have a brain tumour, don't worry about it. But I insisted. Something was not right, and I insisted. And I eventually had a scan where the specialist told me, no, you have not got a brain tumour. And they were right. They were absolutely spot on. I did not have a brain tumour. So when I got a phone call from the specialist to say, you haven't got a brain tumour, I thought, great, fantastic, I haven't got a brain tumour. And I thought, well, what the hell is going on? What's happening to me? And what I found over the preceding year or so was some work that my wife did on the computer, on the internet, because I could no longer use a computer, was this is a condition, and it's particularly well known in Sweden, where the mobile phone was semi-invented, called electrical sensitivity. And there are 300,000 people in Sweden who suffer with electrical sensitivity. And there is now a village just outside Stockholm for people who are electrically sensitive. In the UK, it doesn't exist. And I actually managed, through the course of appearing on the radio, to speak to one of the guys in Sweden who'd become likewise affected. And he'd been a technologist who'd worked on the mobile phone when it was invented. And a number of those people became electrically sensitive. And the way that the company dealt with these people was they shielded their home and they shielded their workplace and they ensured that they didn't have to drive a car so they could get to work. And that went on for a number of years. And then the mobile phone industry became a very powerful industry. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. It grew enormously. And the PR people got involved in, obviously, the mobile phone industry. And the mobile phone industry then fired them all. No compensation, they were all fired. From helping them, they were fired. And the reason they were fired was because the mobile phone industry was out there saying this is perfectly safe and there's no problems and you don't need to worry about it, whilst they were helping these people who had become electrically sensitive themselves. And the PR people realised that probably wasn't a good idea. So they were all fired. The guy now lives in Sweden in a log cabin in the middle of nowhere because he is dramatically electrically sensitive, more so than myself. But what I then started to do was to do the research myself and started to look at all the research that there is around the world that's been done to show whether there is or isn't a problem. And can I ask the group here, it's a small group, might get one or two, how many people notice when they're on their mobile phone that they are affected at all? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You are very mildly electrically sensitive. And you should take notice of that so that you don't end up like me. Because it's a nightmare, believe me. Very difficult to go on holiday, very difficult to stay in hotels, very difficult to go to London, very difficult to live near a mast, impossible to watch TV, impossible to use a computer. Now that depends upon how severely affected you become. But you have a choice, those people that are mildly affected. You can prevent it happening to you, which I didn't do because I thought, I believed the government, I believed the industry. I thought that ICNIRP, the International Commission for Non-Ionising Radiation, was there to protect me. And it's only now that I realise that ICNIRP is there to protect the mobile phone industry, because the people on ICNIRP are the mobile phone industry. And it's the only industry in the world where the governments devolve their responsibility to some external agency to tell them whether it's safe or not. You can't do that in any other industry. You can't do that in the pharmaceutical industry. But with electromagnetic fields, you can. And the reason they do it is that in a number of years' time, when everybody points the finger at the government can say, wasn't us, we had nothing to do with it. Mark my word. But what happened to me as I started to investigate these things, I kept quiet. I did not speak out. I became involved in a charity, and it's difficult being involved in this charity because I promise you, as soon as you get involved, you're a nutcase. But if you get involved, you need to be ready for that. And that's probably true of most areas where people have taken on the authorities. And in that period of time of taking them on, believe me, I've upset the police force, the government, the local government, the education authority, the church, you name it. Because all of those groups of people have vested interests in believing the government. It's called money and it's involved with masts. But I kept quiet because the job that I do, I run probably, I hope, the most successful chilled food business in the UK. Sandwich Brothers. You've never heard of them because we're primarily making own label products, but you might have heard of one of our brands, which is Ginsters. And we have sales of about £750 million, most of it, virtually all of it, going to the major players. Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's, Marks and Spencer's. And the chief exec of that business has to have some credibility. So you have to be a bit careful what you say. So for a number of years, I kept quiet. I worked away in the background. And then 3 things happened to me in quick succession, just before I went out in the newspaper. And I'll try and cut them fairly short. The first thing was somebody persuaded me to give a ring to the Pro-Vice-Chancellor at Leicester University because he would be interested in my condition, Professor Fothergill. And I rang him up, eventually got through to him, and I rang him up and I explained my condition. I was electrically sensitive. Somebody told me that he would be interested in this. And this guy apologised and apologised. I couldn't get a word in edgewise as he apologised and apologised. He was ever so busy, and he was ever so sorry for me, and he was ever so busy, and he was ever so sorry for me, and he was ever so busy. And he just went on and on and on until eventually I stopped him and said, well, OK, fine. You know, I understand. You're too busy to get involved. That's OK. Can you just tell me, what is your area of research? And he coughed, and he spluttered, and he said to me, he was investigating the effects of electromagnetic fields on the human body. And he wasn't interested in me. So that registered. I thought, you know, as I put the phone down, I thought, one of us is mad. I'm not too sure whether it's me or him, but one of us is mad. Shortly after that, I read in a newspaper about a chief inspector of the police force near Swaffingham, where the whole of the officers were being affected by a tetramast that had been installed. And the chief inspector and 4 of his staff had become quite badly affected. And I tried for a couple of weeks to get through to this chief inspector, and eventually I did. And I explained that I was trying to get hold of chief inspector, whatever, the police force. Did I have him? And I had this rough, gruff, typical chief inspector. He says to me, what do you want to know for? Who are you, the press? No, I'm not the press. I'm somebody, and I explained who I was electrically sensitive, and what I had read in the paper led me to believe that that is what was happening to him and the 4 people at the station. And if he didn't take action, he would become seriously damaged. And within the short space of time of saying those words, this rough, gruff chief inspector went from nearly biting my head off to explaining to me what had happened to him as he was within a whisker of being in tears. As he described to me how his career had been ruined, he'd gone from being a star in the force to a bum because he'd become electrically sensitive, and he had been told that they would not transfer him to another station, and they would not take down the tetramast. They then examined him, and there was nothing the matter with him. I don't know how you detect somebody who's got electrical sensitivity, mind you. But that he was now negotiating a package where he would leave the police force on full pension so long as he didn't go to the press. And we put the phone down. And again, I thought, well, hang on a second. Something not quite right here. You know, you can't really have a situation where people are being damaged and the police force want to cover it up. Can you? And then the third thing that happened to me was literally in Melton Mowbray, where our head office is. I'd been looking for an old car, and I'd been to the Range Rover dealership in Melton Mowbray, trying to get an old Range Rover. And the guy that I met, the sales director, he listened to my story, and he wanted to know more. He wanted to know the effects. You know, what did it feel like? And I said, look, you don't want to know. You know, it's irrelevant. I'd just like you to get me a car. No. I'm really interested. What's the effects like? So I described to him a little bit of the effects, and asked him, well, what do you want to know for? He said, well, I'm starting to get these weird sensations in my ear, and it's, you know, it really is horrible. Can't describe it. It's a really horrible sensation. And I smiled. So, well, cut down on your use. Oh, you can't. You know, my job, I've got to be on the phone all day long. You know, I can't cut down my use. If you don't cut down your use, you're going to end up like me. But I was wrong. Because he called me back a couple of weeks later to have a look at this car, and the car was totally unsuitable. It was still far too modern, full of microchips. And his underling showed me the car, and there he was in the background on his mobile phone. And I had to smile to myself, you know, so much he'd listened to me. After my conversation that I had with the gentleman in Sweden that I described to you, he told me how he was managing it, and that what I should be looking for was an old diesel, because there are less electromagnetic fields apparently emitted from a diesel engine than there are from a petrol engine, apparently. So I went back to this place, and this is about a year later, about 9 months later, to ask the same questions, different person, it was a lady. And after the conversation, and again we got nowhere, she sort of said, well, it was a bit sad about her predecessor, because I'd said that I'd met her predecessor. All right, what happened to him? Well, he died about 4 months ago. All right, okay. And this is a guy, 40. What did he die of? He had a brain tumour. Now, I know that those three things prove nothing. But when you're electrically sensitive and you know that there are biological effects from electromagnetic fields, you know something is wrong and somebody's trying to hide it. And that's when I then went in the press and I spoke out. And I attended a number of conferences and found that most of the people involved in this particular field, I met people from Mass Action and so on and so forth. And more recently, I have been in contact with a lot of scientists from France, Germany, Italy, and America. And all these people that are working away are not your traditional campaigners. The people who are heading up these organisations are all electrically sensitive. That's why they know what's the matter. So you've now got this situation where all you've got to do, you're a person with credibility, you've got to go to the right people and get them to listen to you, haven't you? Believe me, when you're faced against an organisation as powerful as the mobile phone industry, who are in league, whether that's the right terminology, I don't know, but hand in glove with the government, because this makes an awful lot of money. The 3G licences were told four years ago for £23 billion. The government can't exactly come along and say, whoops, made a mistake, we're going to take them all down again. And the reality is that probably the reason that the government defeated the IRA was probably down to this technology. They were probably listening in to the conversations that the IRA were having. And to do that, they must have been working like that with the mobile phone industry, for good cause. But they're now working together like that, whilst most of the research that is coming out these days is showing that there's a major problem. And how many people knows that? Are you aware of all the research that comes out? Because it's never published in the UK. They don't want to know. And a group of scientists, of which I have been involved with, have produced this document which shows all the research. And it shows that you are being damaged in a multitude of different ways. And it will include damage to your heart, it will include damage to your brain, it includes damage to your cells, it includes damage to your DNA, it includes damage to your sperm count. Now, all those things have been shown and replicated again and again and again. And the government still says they used to say there's no evidence. What they now say is there's no reliable evidence. And having sat down on a number of occasions with ICNIRB, I can tell you now, reliable evidence is that confirms that it's safe. Unreliable evidence is that doesn't fit in with their thoughts. And they openly admit that they weight the evidence dependent on how reliable they think it is.